Because you get a lot of news, but not enough time to digest it. Inside EWN on 702, 7 to 9 p.m.
And it's 6 minutes past 8 o'clock. Good evening and welcome to the second hour of Inside EWN on 702 and Cape Talk. If you're just joining us, my name is Mahlatse Mahlase. It's a brand new show brought to you by your trusted Eyewitness News team. Next week, you can join us much earlier. We are on from 7 p.m. until 9 p.m. In this hour, we're talking the crisis facing the media industry. We have heard that the news of the decade, we have heard that decade-old publications are closing down, major media houses are retrenching, journalists are also battling as the jobs appear scarcer and scarcer. This hour, I'm joined by News24 Editor-in-Chief Adriaan Basson and Sowetan Editor-in-Chief Nwabisa Makunga. And it's our virtual roundtable discussion, but we are live on EWN Facebook page and of course on our website, www.ewn.co.za. So join us there. If you want to see what all of us look like, you can do so. I have to read one SMS before we continue. Somebody's asking here, why is the boss at 702 anchoring her own news show? Should we blame COVID for destroying jobs? Just to say that actually this show is going to be hosted by the many talented EWN journalists, and they will be bringing you this show. It was just to try it out the first time so that if there are any gremlins, I get to deal with those. But as I said, this hour we are talking the crisis facing the industry, and I'm joined by the News24 Editor-in-Chief Adriaan Basson and also the Sowetan Editor-in-Chief Nwabisa Makunga. And if you want to join us, you can SMS 31702 or 31567. You can also WhatsApp us on 072 702 1702. Adriaan, perhaps let me start with you. The South African National Editors Forum that we both belong to did an impact study just 2 months ago, just to see what has been COVID-19's impact on our newsroom. And it wasn't a pretty picture. Actually, it was in fact very grim. We were counting there some 700 journalists that have lost their jobs, just as President Cyril Ramaphosa announced the lockdown.
Yes, good evening, Mahlatse, and your fellow guests and listeners. It's a very dark time for journalism around the world. I read last week that even at the Guardian newspaper, which has been held up as one of the successful models of funding journalism now, almost 200 journalists are being let off. So it is a very concerning time for our beloved profession. There will be less journalists in the world after this crisis, whenever that is, and we will simply have to reinvent the model of doing journalism. A world without journalism is a scary place, and I think most people listening to the show will agree that we need to find a way to fund and sustain journalism going forward as an industry, not only in South Africa but globally.
Nwabisa, to bring you in, when we look at the VIT State of the Newsroom report, they were already telling us that in 5 years, we had actually lost some 10,000 journalists. What does it mean practically when you are a news editor, when we do have smaller newsrooms?
Hi, good evening, Mahlatse, and thank you so much for inviting me. I think, as Adriaan says, I mean, it's quite dire, not only for our countries, our democracies, but I mean, if you're sitting in a newsroom and kind of trying to do more with less, and really trying to tell the stories that you ought to tell, but don't have the full capacity to do so, it really becomes quite tricky. And so what it actually means is that, one has to do this kind of balancing act, right? So where you have to choose, which stories are we really going to tell, and which stories are we not? Not because we essentially making that choice, but because the situation kind of forces us into that corner where now we have to kind of try and work smartly and work more with less.
But You know, one of the things that has happened is as we're having this conversation, people are thinking about it just as journalists losing their jobs, but not necessarily connecting it to our democracy. Adriaan, what would be the impact on accountability and on our democracy when we have fewer newsrooms and less publications telling the stories of South Africa?
Let's see. Maybe if I can go back to the terrible fire in a block of flats in London called Grenfell a few years ago. You remember, I think it was 3-4 years ago when there was a terrible fire and many people lost their lives in this fire. Now, I attended the conference of the World Association of News last year in Scotland, and they presented a fascinating study at this conference that investigated the role of the media in this fire and the role of the media that could have prevented this fire. And it was an in-depth study done by the British government and academics who found that for the past few years preceding the fire, there was not one journalist covering that council. And that many reports had been produced warning about the unsafety of not only that building, but many blocks of flats in that area, but that newspapers and newsrooms and broadcasting newsrooms had simply run out of money to have a journalist cover that council full-time. Now, I think if I have to ask Nwabisa or yourself, Mahlatse, who of us still have full-time council reporters, I don't expect any of us to lift our hands. In fact, I don't think any of us have full-time High Court or provincial legislature reporters anymore. And what this simply means is that stories will go unseen. Corruption will be able to be swept under the carpet. Maladministration will flourish. We won't be there to raise alarm when something is tabled in a portfolio committee session in a provincial legislature. Many provinces around the country, and I exclude here Gauteng, the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, are already almost non-existent on the radar of national news organizations simply because we don't have the resources to be there. So I think that's ultimately the price we pay, and we're probably not going to see the result of that price immediately, but we will see it definitely over time. Actually, just tonight again, I read a report about the state of local government in South Africa, and I was from just shocked again to read, for example, about the Mangaung local municipality that has basically collapsed. I mean, the local government in Bloemfontein or the bigger Mangaung municipality has literally collapsed, and we haven't covered that story as News24 as big as we should have. And that is the point. That is the point. The point is that we as news organizations will focus only on the big stories, the national stories. We will depend on press releases. We will depend on government's own version of events, and we won't have people to go and sit in those councils, in those legislatures, in parliament, in the courtrooms.
You know, and one of the worrying factors is that many of the publications that are closing down and not getting the news headlines are local publications where, we can have those reporters in those councils allowing us at a national level to pick up stories from them. And if you look at the Auditor General's report every year, it's a sorry state of affair. And we know that corruption starts at that very local level. Nwabisa, are South Africans connecting what this crisis means for their democracy?
Not so much. I don't think so. I think, of course, there are people who understand, what the role of the media is and the role of actually digging deep and actually finding out the truth and, and serving them. I think there are people obviously who understand that, but I think perhaps many people, in my view, kind of seeing what is really happening in the media are not quite, translating it into what it means for democracy, what it means for their communities, what it means, for their provinces, their country. Adriaan talks about having, full-time sort of council reporters, and I want to make an example. I work now for the Sowetan, and unfortunately we don't have that. But I come from the Eastern Cape, from Nelson Mandela Bay, where it's probably one of the few newspapers in the country, which is the Herald, which actually does have a council reporter. And I look at the difference. because there you have literally journalists whose job is to watch over that council, and the stuff that's actually coming out of there and really kind of empowering the community in that area, you know, to know exactly what is happening in their local council. So when the Auditor General, for example, says, you know, things are bad, nobody's surprised in Nelson Mandela Bay because they've been seeing it, you know, in the front pages of that newspaper. And I think for me, if we were to take, you know, that and kind of replicate it, you know, across the country, there's so much more that we would know, not just at national level, but actually, I mean, in our local councils and our local municipalities. And I think that's the thing, you know, is that we give people, obviously, you know, information that they need, but not enough. Particularly when it comes to their bread and butter issues that affect them in their streets, in their communities, you know, in their local councils.
And then people listening to us are wondering, why are we in this crisis? What has happened? But if we are to be honest, it's very easy to blame COVID-19. But Adriaan, we do know that this crisis has been with us for quite some time. We've been talking about the funding models where advertising revenue is just not there anymore to support local journalism.
Yes, Mahlatse, I think there's many reasons why the media is today in the state it is. You know, and it's natural to want to quickly point fingers, but I think, you know, from my point of view, I think a lot of it has to do with the what is now called Fourth Industrial Revolution as well. So I think the advent of technology and specifically the emergence of the behemoths, Google and Facebook, had changed the world completely for most of us, and for consumers, for our readers. It's all about the readers, of course, and the listeners, you know, and the public. We are just a medium. So, I mean, the traditional role of the newspaper that was started hundreds of years ago was to convey to a community decisions by the guardians of a community, chieftains or guardians. And that role has since significantly changed with these big technology companies, where the president of the United States now communicate directly to his electorate via Twitter. So Donald Trump no longer sees a need for the media, and I think he's been a major influence in this tendency that we're seeing these days. Also in South Africa, I won't name names, of political leaders from all parties thinking that they can run their own media shows. They don't need us. They do their own podcasts, their own video casts, their own newsletters. They employ former journalists in their offices. And that they can cut out, you know, these pesky people like Mahlatse Mahlase who ask the hard questions, because why do they need us when they can speak directly to the electorate? And I think, and I hope, and I pray that the past 4 years of Donald Trump has showed the world, not only that country, but the world, the price you pay if you allow the media to be called the enemy of the people, if you allow a concept like fake news to be used for authentic journalism like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN. That is the price America is now paying, and we should be very careful. We should guard very sacredly the space we still have in our country to fulfill that role of the fourth estate. I do think that these technology platforms play the big role. So suddenly you had these platforms that readers go to or users go to read their news. They started moving away from traditional platforms, and then the same happened in advertising. So to make it very, very real for your listeners, you know, a Pick and Pay in Sandton may have advertised in the local newspaper and on local radio stations and even maybe television in that area. But they can now go to Facebook and Google. They can target specific audiences who live in that area, who they know what they have bought, what they like to buy, and they cut us out. So part of that is to blame us as media industry. I think we must take some of the blame that we have allowed these guys to improve their technology much faster than we have. But I think we have caught up. You know, I can only speak for my own company, but, you know, our advertising teams, they sometimes speak in a language which I don't understand when they talk about, you know, how they target users and how they can help an advertiser read their target audience. So I think there's also this perception still in the minds of advertisers and agencies and some clients that you have to go to Facebook and Google to spend your money.
It's a new thing. It's a new thing. People chase that new thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But of course, the downside of it is that, you can have some of those brands ending up supporting fake news, as we've seen repeatedly, Nwabisa.
I think that's exactly it. And when one talks about these brands kind of going digital, and so they should, and so all of us should. But there's something that I think we should never forget about real credible journalism, and which is that it's credibility, and that's pretty much what our currency is, which is why it's something that we should totally invest in and guard with everything that we have, because it's a very easy kind of trap to fall into, to basically support fake news, and if you don't have a journalist who's kind of there, kind of triple checking and fact checking and really doing the legwork of what we need to do, that's basically the trap that they could fall into.
And Adriaan, I mean, do corporates consider that sometimes their ads end up in these fake stories that are being peddled on social media, and the damage that it does to their own brands?
I think that conversation has started in South Africa. I think it can get louder still. I think we should beat that drum as editors and as SANEF, particularly in our conversations with private South Africa, because I have personally I've made it a hobby to visit these fake news sites and see whose brands I find on them. And then I take screenshots and I send it to them as a hobby. But I think we need to do this. Mahlatse, I think the harder part of this discussion is that, of course, a Pick and Pay, and I'm just picking on them tonight, it could be anyone, it could be ShopRite, it could be Woolworths, it could be BMW, it could be whoever, have no obligation to support us. And I think, that is where the conversation gets hard. Yes, they did it for many years through newspapers and radio stations and TV, but they've now got Google and Facebook, and, it's really not a moral argument one can make. I think there's a compelling argument to make why they should advertise in local media, and that they should at least give us some of their advertising spend, not everything. But
I want to disagree with you there, Adriaan. I actually think they have a moral responsibility to be supporting South African media, because it is the media that every day exposes the rot or questions some of the decisions of those in authority that makes it easier for them to be able to be in business. I mean, if it wasn't for the work of journalists in the Gupta Gates and the emails that we exposed, we could be telling a much worse story in terms of South Africa's trajectory. Nwabisa? Can I pull you into this conversation?
I don't disagree with you, Mahlatse, right? I agree that there is a moral argument to be made. Whether or not that argument would be compelling enough to people who are basically just here to do business, is another story. I mean, I would love for them to advertise only on our platforms. I think all of us will probably do that. But I think the reality is that, what we need to put is a compelling business case of eyes on our platforms, and basically saying, we come with, all these audiences, and this is what, what they come to us for. And so this is where you want to be. This is basically where, where the show actually happens. And I think for me, that's the thing.
And I mean, I'm going to just press on this, because I mean, COVID-19 was just one example of the fact that we're still bringing in the numbers. I mean, the fact that we saw audiences rise across many platforms, whether it's television, radio, or online, just shows that South Africans are still craving for credible news, especially in the face of fake news that is actually being peddled. People want to hear credible, fact-checked news, as opposed to the WhatsApp conversations that get peddled in our family groups. I'm sure all of you have seen those fake stories that do the rounds. Adriaan, but do you not think, though, that when they do decide on where they spend their money, if it's there, that they should consciously think about South African brands?
Look, I think there's some bosses or private sector captains of industry we can have that discussion with, and it will have some impact. But also after COVID-19, all companies have cut their marketing spend. I mean, that's the first place where they cut. So even the money that was coming to advertising is going to be less. And I think Nwabisa is right. You know, at the end of the day, they have to deliver profits and protect the jobs of their employees, and not think of the survival of News24, Eyewitness News, or the Sowetan. As much as I think we can make that argument, of course we can make that argument, and we should make it to government too. I mean, for government, it becomes even more compelling because they sit with a multi-million rand careers and recruitment budget, advertising budget, which used to fund Sunday newspapers. You remember those thick Sunday Times,
yes.
City Press newspapers that had like a 50 page advertisements, you know. I think there's also a discussion to be had. But where I was going with my argument is that, and this is why News24 has taken this decision, I think we do have to start to talk to our readers as well and our listeners.
I was going to come there. Because if
they do not see value in our products, if they are not willing to take out their wallets to support us, then really we are, what is that nice word? Stuffed. Because if our readers, and just to conclude, I mean, we spoke about integrity, credibility. That is what it's about, bottom line. And if our readers don't think that we can do that anymore and they don't want to pay for that, then we can close shop.
I want to get into that because that's quite a critical one, because importantly is that South Africans can actually do something about it, and it's a conversation we need to have. If you're just joining us, it's 26 minutes past 8. My name is Mahlatse Mahlase. You're listening to Inside EWN on 702 and Cape Talk. And if you're watching us on our website, www.ewn.co.za, it's the second hour of our show. It's the roundtable, and we're speaking to two of the country's leading editor-in-chiefs, News24's Adriaan Basson and Sowetan's Editor-in-Chief Nwabisa Makunga. You can join in this conversation because the question we're asking is, with the crisis facing the media, what is the impact on accountability and on our democracy? You can call us on 011-883-0702 if you're listening to us via 702, and if it's Cape Talk, it's 021-446-0567. You can also SMS us 31702 or 31567. Our WhatsApp message is 072-702-1702. Adriaan, I want to pick up on that conversation you had, because News24 is by far the biggest online publication in Africa, and you announced that you are going to launch a digital subscription service. This is after years of people getting used to getting your news for free. I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision to make. As someone who was there before, it was a conversation that has been bubbling under for quite some time. Just take us through what led to this decision.
Mahlatse, I'm glad you still remember those conversations. We finally made a decision. Look, I think a few things. I think the state of our industry that we've been talking about in the first half an hour is definitely part of it. I think as a company and as a newsroom, we took the long view that even if we better our game at advertising and convince these captains of industry and business and government leaders to, in the name of a good society and strengthening democracy, send us more of the advertising rands, I don't think that is sustainable enough to build a news platform with longevity that covers the whole of South Africa and that tells the story of the country as a whole. I think we simply have to increase our revenue, build a second revenue stream, and in the process get closer to our readers. Secondly, we've been watching carefully what has happened internationally, globally for the past decade. And you guys will remember that, you know, the New York Times in 2010-11, when they launched the paywall, they were like the first ones out of the blocks. It was this strange experience where you can only read a few stories and then you had to pay. And we all hated it, let's not lie. We all hated it. We tried to find the story in a free way. Same happened, I think, with the Financial Times. And then kind of we became used to it, and now I subscribe to 2 or 3 international publications and I find it normal, and I pay them as I pay Netflix or Spotify. So I think people's behavior had also changed, and I think the behavior of paying for good journalism and for information that you need to make decisions about your life had changed. So I think I think we tried to find the right time to do this, and we figured that it was now, and secondly, we had to do this. If I could just add a third point, Mahlatse, you're right. Of course, we have a massive audience, and we are under no illusion, absolutely no illusion, that the majority of our readers will not pay, for news, and cannot probably pay for news in a South African context, and that is completely understandable. And I will not judge anyone who chooses not to subscribe for whatever reason. I think that there will be enough, and I really hope there will be enough readers who realize that what we offer them on our platform is of value, that it is something worth paying for. One of our speakers at a conference we had last week to launch our subscription service, he's a Polish guy who teaches journalism at Oxford, and he was talking about the fact that bread, you cannot just go to your baker and ask for bread for free. And he was making a comparison between, news and the importance of news, especially in a time like COVID-19, and with the importance of food and bread, And this is a behavioral change. Unfortunately, none of us three decided to give away news for free. That was our colleagues who are no longer here. But we have to live this, we have to do this. It is brave and it's risky, and I don't know how it's going to work out.
But, I agree with that analogy that if people have to choose between bread and newspaper, they're likely to choose bread. And Nwabisa, you work for a newspaper. It is quite an important newspaper in South Africa, actually, and you bring valuable information. But over the years, we have seen less and less people buying newspapers. How do we make South Africans connect that buying a newspaper is what gives them the decent, investigative, quality journalism that they get to have things to talk about?
Absolutely. I think, Adriaan is making the analogy about bread, and my favorite one is always, I say to the team, the day that I send out journalists to a story and they have to go and get, and put petrol in their car and they swipe with their press cards rather than what they actually need to pay, that's the day where we're saying, okay, we will be fine. We wouldn't need to make people pay for our news. And unfortunately, it's a behavioral change. And I think this is why, for me, these conversations are quite important, because the fact of the matter is the people who go out and get these stories are human beings who actually need to survive. What we are, is a business that needs to sustain the people that work for it to be able to bring you the news, that you want and the news that you consume. And the more we're able to do that, the more we're able to bring you, the credible news, where we have built capacity in our newsrooms to be able to attend to pretty much, as much as you want us to cover for you. And I think if we are unable to do that, constrained by finances, there's a very real danger that we may only cover a fraction of the South African story. And when that happens, a lot goes, uncovered, a lot goes unknown. And it goes back to that whole conversation that we had about strengthening our democracy.
Let's take in a caller here. We've got Tulani from Guatemala. Tulani, you are saying that challenges faced by the media resembles the death of IDASA, obviously an iconic institution in South Africa's democracy.
Yes, of course, because most people, when IDASA, during the dark days, IDASA was one of the most pieces, and then even Kasag tried to close that space, but is not able to close the space. So it's like, even myself, I used to have newspapers, but it's difficult to be having a newspaper where if you've got the data and the cell phone. So I think this death is going to hit people hard. But with people like Adriaan, I think they can still write the books, because if maybe write books, people might have time to read the books.
But we need you to buy newspapers and subscribe to our online platform. Are you willing to pay for news, Tulani? And do South Africans see that they have to pay for news?
Yes, because if the journalists are not good enough, and then sometimes you get a headline that says something, but when you read, you buy the newspaper, and then it does not give you what is there on the outside. But if you get something on the line, I think it's much better because you sometimes at night you have to sit on a table and read that big newspaper. Well, if you've got a cell phone device, you can just open it and read while you're moving around. So I think he's here with us. Remember what happened to Murdoch and the world news of the world.
Yes.
Britain, he died. So it's not something new. Even TV, you will see sometimes, Mahlase, you will be watching the news that happened yesterday, but they'll be read today as if something happens today.
So Thulani, thank you very much. So you are basically saying that if we give you quality news, you will actually pay for that news. And I think that's what all of us are striving for as news editors. An SMS that has come in from Tabiso Moleleki, and he's saying that we witnessed Jacob Zuma being a part of ANN7 and influencing their newsroom. Could it be a possibility that with the fewer media houses that will be left, we'll see politicians capitalizing and taking advantage with trying to manipulate the content? Who wants to take that? Nwabisa?
So my view on that is quite a simple one. I mean, I think politicians, business people, anybody who wants access to a media platform would definitely want to do that. But I think for me, outside of a newsroom, the power really does lie with consumers. So if consumers know that what we give to them is not something credible, they basically vote with their feet, and that business itself becomes unsustainable, even for the politician or the business person who kind of took it over for nefarious ends. And I think for me, this is why the relationship that we as journalists have with the people who read our news, is quite an important one, because we need to know what it is that they want, and we need to be able to serve their interests rather than anybody else's. Of course, people would always try. He speaks about the example of ANN7, and yes, I mean, I get that. But I think, the reason why it would not have survived, other than, what really it was made up of, is really because there were credibility issues, major credibility issues that ordinary audiences were just not buying into.
And what we do know is that audiences leave as soon as they can read quickly that here, this is a one-sided story, or there's a particular narrative that is being pushed, and we are not hearing the other side. And we are very much aware that, whether it's a radio station, people just simply change the dial. If it's an online platform, they choose another website. And if it's a newspaper, they just buy another newspaper. So that is what we are very much aware of. Adriaan, though, we've seen this model of subscription being tested in other parts of the world. Has it been successful in South Africa? Because the initial reaction from some in the Twitter world was that we will not pay for news.
Yeah, I won't know, Mahlatse. I'm not much, not on Twitter so much anymore, because
Good
I think that was one of the problems in South Africa, is that a lot of people think that is the world. But let me not get sidetracked. I think that's a very pertinent question, and I think one has to look at where paywalls have worked and where not. So. We didn't only look at the New York Times. I think that would be a mistake. We looked at Eastern Europe and Scandinavia. We looked at Asia. We looked at Australia. And there's actually some very cool examples of newsrooms that have successfully managed to get subscribers, get readers to pay them for their content. In our context, of course, we follow in the footsteps of the like of Arena, the group to which Nwabisa's title also belongs. They launched a number of paywalls a few years ago for Business Day, Sunday Times, etc. I'm not aware that they published the subscriber numbers to those websites, but I do believe they are successful. We've also, in our own group, Media24, we've seen Netwerk24, which is the Afrikaans paywall. It's a hard paywall. You cannot read anything unless you pay 99 Rand a month. And they have published, in the last few months, they published that they are almost on 70,000 subscribers, paying subscribers, which is a good number. If you remember, in the heyday of newspapers, daily newspapers, their circulation was around 150,000. So I think that's good growth for them. And then also we saw the Daily Maverick launching a membership program or system of payment for their readers, so their readers can subscribe or then become a member at whatever amount they choose. So that is almost more a contribution or the donation model that the likes of The Guardian in the UK has also implemented. So we have seen different models, and I don't know, I can't sit here and tell you if ours is going to work or not. I hope it does, and we're giving it our best chance. We're putting good journalism up on News24 every day. We have to start somewhere. We have to change the behavior somewhere. Sorry, I was knocking my hand on the desk because I'm so passionate about this.
We hear you. Quite an emphatic. We have to actually try sometime.
You know, it's come down on our generation, I'm afraid. You know, we have to change this perception that everything on the internet must be free. You know, that is a false perception. It is the wrong perception. That internet is dead. You know, if you go onto the internet today, you have to pay for quality content, whether it's music, whether it's movies, whether it's news. So if we can just succeed in that, and it's going to have to be the whole media industry. You know, it can't be one publication on its own. To change that behavior, we would have succeeded in our mission.
I've got a listener here. Dumisani is calling us from Tembisa. Dumisani, you are saying paying for news is a good thing.
Yes, it's a good thing because we are moving towards a digital world. But now there's a problem. A lot of people that read the newspaper are older people and they don't understand technology. So that's one of the bad things about digital media.
And we know that, Dumisani, our literacy levels are also not so good. And it's also a question that is being asked here by Chris from Pretoria. And I'll send it to you, Nwabisa. He's asking, quality journalism, won't it deny a vast majority access to information and participation in public discourse, thereby polarizing the media space? And I guess to add to that, we know that in South Africa, for example, data is already an issue. It's just way too expensive.
Yes. Yes.
Nwabisa?
I think definitely, Mahlase, I mean, I get that point. I think what we're basically trying to do is one, we need to be sustainable for us to continue doing journalism, right? And I think, I mean, there's a whole argument which I won't even go to, because about data and really how it kind of separates South Africa and kind of entrenches our inequality because of how expensive it is. I know there's obviously conversations about data falling, etc., etc. But I think for me the overarching point is really one about the fact that we actually do need to be sustainable, because if we're not sustainable, then we can't bring journalism for anybody. And I think obviously not everything that is, particularly if you're talking on the internet, not everything that, not every piece of journalism that is there is to be paid for. I mean, there's stuff, depending on what kind of model you choose, there's stuff that would be free and the stuff that, would need to pay for. But I think we are unable to say, oh, well, it may be, divisive and polarizing to our audiences, depending on who can pay, because ultimately there has to be sustainability for us to be able to do and bring that journalism. And at the moment, it is unsustainable to only rely on advertising.
It's 2046. My name is Mahlatse Mahlase. We are talking, as newsrooms shrink, what is the impact on accountability and our democracy? And also asking you the question, are you willing to pay for news? And I'm joined in this discussion by News24 Editor-in-Chief Adriaan Basson and Sowetan Editor-in-Chief Nwabisa Makunga. It's our virtual roundtable. We are live on our EWN Facebook page and also on our website, www.ewn.co.za. And of course, you're listening to us via 702 and Cape Talk. We are talking tough times facing the industry and asking the question, are you willing to pay for news? What I'm finding is that the trust levels in South Africa have deteriorated between readers and us, the people who deliver the news, because a lot of the SMSs that I'm getting here is that, we are one-sided, we only give one view, and that is why we deserve to die, but people are still listening. And I guess, Adriaan, it is important for us to continue to up our game, but it's also, to up our game, we need to continue to invest in journalism, because investigative quality journalism is expensive.
I hope our bosses are listening, Mahlatse. Journalism is expensive. No, but I mean, journalism. There's an old story of a former journalist who once told his general manager was complaining about the month's bills, and he was just looking at him and said, "Journalism is expensive," and that is true. Like Nwabisa said earlier, you need to put someone, and often two people, in a Toyota Corolla and send them away for a few days, put them into a cheap B&B, buy data to get the video back to Johannesburg. I mean, it's not a charity. We're not, we're not funded by government or by, some guy who was rich with very deep pockets. We are all businesses, and we have shareholders, and we are not, unlike the SABC, there's not a bailout on the cards every year, and we have to make a profit and we have to adapt. So yes, it is an expensive business, and if we want to keep on doing the kinds of journalism which I think will be needed even more in future. I mean, we've just seen, I'm sure the two of you will agree with me, just during this COVID, the level of education we had to bring into our newsrooms. I never thought I would know so much about health and health topics and all those words, the level of education, the level of data that we have to handle on a daily basis to tell the story of COVID-19. It's a whole new world of journalism, and we are all trying our best, but I think we can do more, and I think we need to invest in upskilling our journalists, upskilling our technology, bringing data experts into our newsrooms to interpret these kind of things. And it's just going to become more. It's not going to become easier. And then at the same time, still have those old hacks in the councils and the courtrooms and the legislatures, because those stories are important.
Well, there's Mushere here from Pretoria West who is not agreeing with us. He's saying, if News24 is paid for, what will one be paying for? The internet, he asks. Mushere, you don't agree that you should pay for news?
No, I just want to, it might be maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah.
Because internet is not for free. If you're paying for internet and also News24 want you to subscribe, then what will be the use of having internet? What will you paying for if you're paying for internet? If all other platforms will want you to subscribe, whereas you're also paying for internet.
But you need to subscribe to a news agency to be able to get the news.
I'm asking if all other media platforms, all other whatever that when you have internet, you are able to access. What if they all go the same route? Then what will be the point of having internet? Because that is not for free.
Okay, Adriaan, do you want to take that? I think we need to just explain that difference, and that's what you were talking about people making the connection that just because it's on the internet, it's not free. Just because you're paying for data, you still have to pay for the news.
I think that's an important distinction, Mahlatse, to a reader. I mean, the money that he pays to his service provider, whether it's MTN or Vodacom or MWeb or whoever it is, that money doesn't come to us or anything that he reads on the internet. That money only goes to the company that provides the data and the technology. So the content on the internet, if you can think about it, let's say a newspaper, those blank pages belong to one company, but the other company who put the pictures and the words and the advertisements is a completely different outfit. So, the data companies do not pay us. They don't pay us any cent to produce the stories. And as we said earlier, we have to send our teams of journalists every day, apart from paying their salaries, we have to send them out into stories, out into the field, get data done, buy video cameras, etc. So it's two very different things, but a very valid point. And I think that's again one of those balances we're going to have to reach, is people's data costs versus extra money they have left to pay for content.
And Nwabisa, is that what you've also been seeing, where people just think that, you know, the internet, I'm already paying for data, therefore I don't have to go out and buy the newspaper?
Absolutely, you know, definitely. And I think there's a very important distinction, obviously, to be made. I mean, there's, on the one hand, you have people. I think somebody earlier was asking, but what about people who are older who would like, you know, like to actually read their print version? And I think there's a difference between you know, the platform on which the journalism is presented and obviously the journalism itself. And I think what we're asking, you know, in the conversation about needing to pay for journalism, is that, you know, regardless of what platform it actually is on, the fact is it's still a costly exercise to deliver that information onto the platform. And so I think for me that's a very important distinction that, you know, that we need to make. And yes, there are people who are saying, no, but if I'm then reading you guys online, then and I'm being made to subscribe, then I'm basically paying double, because I'm paying you know, for the actual internet and as well as your content. And for me, the analogy I like to use is one of actually driving to a petrol station, paying your petrol to go there, and then getting to, you know, to buy the newspaper. Just because you actually drove, you know, and use your petrol to go to the petrol station does not automatically make the newspaper itself, when it's there, free. And it's one of those things. It's quite a tricky one. It's, you know, it's tricky, but journalism is an expensive exercise, I'm afraid.
And I mean, this conversation around paying for journalism, Adriaan, why is it just us, the editors, who are saying this? Why are we not hearing civil society joining in this conversation?
Maybe we're not very good at lobbying them. You know, maybe we should start some kind of broad frontier of people helping us with this message. Of course, you can also get the criticism that, you know, they're not going to help us to make more profit. But without
us, they have no platform.
Well, exactly. I think it's a process of education. It's not trying to be preachy, but I think we have to talk about this. I think discussions like this is very useful to tell our readers and our listeners about how newsrooms work. How do we get the news? It's not just miraculously appearing from somewhere. You literally send someone into the Randburg Magistrates Court for 8 hours to get that 1 or 2 stories, you know. So I think it's important to talk about how we do the news. That's something that we're also particularly bad at as journalists. We talk about everyone else except ourselves. So I think we need to talk a bit more about our newsrooms, about our processes, about the value of journalism, you know, re-emphasize again the importance of telling stories like the one that's in the news at the moment around the Gauteng health tenders, like the story of state capture of Jacob Zuma and the kind of last decade, as it's called now. You know, the stories that papers like Nwabisa's former paper, The Herald, and the sister paper, Dispatch, were doing for many years in the Eastern Cape about health in that province, although some people do think that the BBC broke that story. You know, it's important. We do. And it's important to... Yeah. It's important to talk about these stories and how we do them. You know, maybe we should almost make it second habit to write the story behind the story with every big thing we do.
Yeah. And then we've got Thomas from Sandton. He's asking, is it justified for me to pay to know what is happening in my country and my government? Thomas, I want to ask you, how would you know what is happening in your country and what your government is doing if the journalists were not uncovering it?
Yes, and I totally agree that the journalists deserve to pay. But me as a scholar, I'm thinking I need to know what's happening in my society. I need to know what's happening to have an opinion about my world. But is it fair and is it legally justified for me to pay to have a human right to know what my government at the least is doing?
So who should pay the journalists then who go out and get the stories to tell you what your government is doing?
No, I agree it's unfair, but I think in a perfect world, the government should pay for that. But I'm thinking in the biggest scheme of things, is it fair for me to pay for the basic knowledge of what's going on?
I think, Thomas, the issue now that some might say is that, you know, even the newspaper, it's something that we actually went out to go and buy. And perhaps there is some confusion that has come in with getting news from the internet, where people think that because it's online, therefore it must be free.
Yeah, I think it's hard, but I just, as a citizen of my country, I want to know what my president is doing every single day. I want to know what is happening in government. And for me to look for that knowledge, now I need to pay. Is it fair for people who maybe, because I'm a bit more financially privileged, is it fair for someone who can't even afford to pay for food, now expected to pay for the bare right of knowledge to know what's happening with our government?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was Thomas from Sowetan. Others might argue that's why we need a public broadcaster that is independent and does have a decent funding from the government, but we know that they don't. I mean, the SABC itself, over 70% of its budget comes from advertising revenue, and they're feeling the pressure that we are all feeling. Adriaan?
Yes, no, absolutely. I wanted to also talk about the SABC, but that is completely correct. So I think, you know, if Thomas wants to see what the government's doing, he's got that option to listen to SABC and to go to the government's website. Of course, we think that we add another layer of interpretation, analysis, and reporting on top of that. But you're completely correct, Mahlatse. The vast majority of our citizens in South Africa cannot pay for news, and they are dependent on the SABC, and that's why the SABC's radio stations are still so huge. And we are just another form of media. The three of us and our institutions are so-called private or independent media, you know, and we're talking about our business model tonight. We're not getting funding from the government. We have to pay our own way. And I think, you know, history has brought us to this point where we have to ask our readers who can to I almost want to say, invest in the future of journalism.
Guys, time flies when you're actually having fun. I can't believe that hour went by so quickly, but thank you very, very much for joining me, Editor-in-Chief of the Sowetan, Nwabisa Makunga, and Editor-in-Chief of News24. That was our inaugural roundtable with the editors, and we will be bringing you more of this, debating many other issues. It could be around the news industry. It could be the big stories that we are covering in the week, but this is your brand new show, Inside EWN. My name is Mahlatse Mahlase, and thank you very much to the EWN team that has put their hearts into producing this first show. Do give us your comment, your feedback. We love hearing from you. You can reach us on inside@ewn.co.za.